It's an honor to have another discussion with you, Ken. You're an author and a
Hey,
publisher. Um,
that's right. I'm glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
yeah, yeah, and right before we started, I was showing you how I promoting your books,
I
and
appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. Let me ask you before we start, which one of those was your favorite one to write so far?
Oh boy. Probably UFOs in the Bible. So this guy here. Yeah. Like that was sort of well, I guess that was the second book I wrote. The one I did before that was Magic in the Bible, which I'm not sure if you have. I'm not really pushing that one too hard because it's um it's more from a really oh, you got it, yeah. From a pretty Christian perspective, which is, that's fine, but not necessarily everybody is going to kind of get where it's coming from. But that kind of set me on the path of like thinking about things a bit differently and really and analyzing these ancient texts because you know um, a lot of people will read the Bible every day and get a lot of good wisdom out of it. But we also have to remember that it's at least 3,000 years old. Well, at least 2,500 years old, and parts of it are probably 3,000 or maybe even older. And it's not necessarily the way we read it isn't necessarily the way that the author intended it. Um, and so, like, I'm not trying to necessarily change anybody's belief or anything, but there are there are a lot of stories in there that are often told a certain way, and that's not necessarily the only way that we can understand what they mean. So, yeah, I started um, getting interested in that kind of thing with the magic the idea of what magic was in the Bible and looking at some of these characters like Moses and Joseph and Daniel and there's a few other people in there, and basically they're kind of doing magic stuff, and it's like, well, how do they do that? And so, is there a difference between magic and a miracle? Is it the same thing? So I kind of explore that a little bit. And that got me kind of into the whole idea, and then I really wanted to uh, check out this idea of UFOs because um, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Eric von Daniken and his Chariots of the Gods book, and he says some stuff in there that sounds kind of wild, and so I thought, well, I'm gonna. Well, to be honest, it's kind of funny because um, I saw him. I think he said this in an interview. I'm trying to remember where I saw it, but basically, um, he was talking about a. Uh, I think he was talking about a section from the book of Ezekiel, and he states in his book, "Oh yeah, so blah blah blah. It's this or that or the other thing." I forget exactly what he was talking about. And he goes, "Without actually going and reading and checking the text, I can assume blah blah blah." And I'm like, "What? You wrote this section without even reading that passage that you're talking about? Like, why? Why wouldn't you go back and check it out?" So I was like, "Dude, I've got a Bible. I'm gonna go back and check it out." So I did, and I was kind of expecting to think like, oh yeah, this guy's wacko. He doesn't, this isn't what the Bible says. But when I read it, I was like, whoa, he's actually got a point here. So it turns out that there's, I started digging into it to try and figure out, well, what is going on here? And as it turns out, there was like, I'm just going to read here. I think I had 80, no, there's 45 separate encounters in the Bible that according to this interpretation that I dig into in here, if you consider those to be UFOs, there's 45 instances where somebody in the Bible witnessed a UFO. And the really interesting thing about it is that in almost every one of those occasions, we see um, elements of the phenomenon being described in ways that are still being used today by UFO witnesses. So, flying craft, metallic craft, they usually talk about them as being made out of bronze. Now, keep in mind, the authors did not know about steel or aluminum, so bronze may have just been the closest thing that they could describe. Um, but yeah, there's like so many interesting um, parallels between um, if you were to sit down and listen to an interview of a UFO witness today, or anytime from recent times, and compare it to the stories that we hear in the Bible, they're strikingly similar. So yeah, that kind of got me down a rabbit hole of UFO stuff, and I ended up writing like 3 or 4 books about UFOs. Um, and then along the way, I kind of got into some Sumerian mythology, and now my most recent book is the Pyramid Tech, um, which is kind of interesting how I decided to do that because I've always been really interested in Egypt and pyramids and all that stuff, but I never really was planning on writing a book about it until I came across this guy on YouTube who's an author as well. His name is Jeffrey Drum, and he has this theory that I can tell you a little bit about. But basically, I was like, dude, this is like this totally nails it. This is like the only guy who really has come up with a good explanation to me about why pyramids exist, why they were built, and so I read his book, and I read Jeffrey's book, and I was kind of hoping that I would get more detail out of it from like just listening to his YouTubes and stuff. They're really interesting, but I was kind of wanted to really dig into it. But it turned out that his book is kind of a fictionalized version, like telling a story of somebody who kind of comes to these realizations. And so there's actually, if you're looking for more of the scientific details, it's actually more in his some of his YouTube explanations than in the book per se. So I thought, well, I'm going to talk to this guy. So I sent Jeffrey an email, managed to track him down, and I said, hey, I got some questions, and he basically just he didn't he redirected me to his book, and I said, "Oh yeah, I read your book already, but I still have some other questions." And I was like, I'm well, I, I'm just going to write another book and sort of respond. So it's not uncommon in the field to write about to not to write about another book necessarily, but to take we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. So we read a book and then it we formulate ideas and responses to that and come up with new twists and turns. And so essentially that was what I said to Jeffrey. And uh, basically I started writing this book, Pyramid Tech, and I don't like go into a ton of detail explaining Jeffrey's theory because I want you guys to go and let him explain it to you. So go check out Jeffrey Drum. He's on a bunch of YouTube. Like he guests on a bunch of different YouTube channels, and he's got his own website called The Land of Chem. That's The Land of Chem, like short for chemistry. And it's kind of a play on the old name of Egypt as the land of Kum. So he's done a little bit of a pun on that. Um, and so without going too much into detail in terms of what his theory is, I'll basically just say that he's proposed that the pyramids are were built as chemical factories, and so it the way he explained it made a lot of sense to me. And I'm not a professional chemist, but I did take 2 courses of chemistry in university, so I know a little bit about what I'm talking about, and enough to follow along with his argument at least. And but I did take a lot of physics. I had basically a physics minor in university. So what I did was I took his proposal, and I kind of looked at it through a physics lens in terms of balancing the forces that would be generated. So he talks a lot about various compression and pumping. So pumps and compressors that play a large role in this theory. So essentially, it has to do with the shape of the interior chambers of some of these massive pyramids, and that includes the Great Pyramid of Giza, some of the other smaller pyramids at Giza, and some of the pyramids at Dashur, particularly. And essentially, what I did was I focused primarily on the Red Pyramid of Dashur, and I took a look at what Jeffrey was proposing as to how it worked, and I ran it as if it were a physics experiment. So I kind of went step by step and said, okay, so supposedly they would pour water down this primary shaft, and then as the chambers fill up, the air above the water line will be compressed. And so if that air contains certain gaseous molecules, certain chemical combinations, then the theory is, as Jeffrey presents it, is that if you put the right compounds in, you'll get. It was in this case, it's actually that it creates ammonia. So basically, the idea is that you have to pump enough water down that tube, and then what I did was I calculated what the actual pressures would be at various levels throughout that process. And what I found was um, I don't want to give you numbers and have them be wrong. So let me just try and find it here while I'm talking. But basically, there's like really high pressures are generated inside the upper parts of that chamber. And if you basically you have to do it uh, in a contained manner. So this process is done today in industrial settings, where we make ammonia in order to it's the one of the median steps in the process of making fertilizer, as well as several other components that we use ammonia for. But one of the main things is fertilizer, um, which Jeffrey also is, is very much on that same page that the Egyptians were making fertilizer, which makes a lot of sense because you're in the desert, you've got the Nile River, and it's highly fertile soil that's coming down every flood season and every spring. But all around, like you're really limited in terms of all the cities have to be right on the Nile River. If you wanted to have the population spread at all, you would have to be able to irrigate and um, fertilize the land, because that the sand as it is really not suitable for farming at all. He also goes into the concept that anyone here who's a fan of or who follows Graham Hancock will be familiar with the Green Sahara theory, and also kind of ties back to the work of Robert Schoch around the dating of the Giza complex and the Sphinx and the pyramids there, and so it ends up going down this really interesting path where all the variables are falling into place to presumably, if this is true, then also it would have been probably happening at a certain time. So you can kind of put the puzzles all together, which honestly I think is quite fascinating. And it shows that people have been doing civilized things for a lot longer than we ever thought. And again, this takes us back to a lot of other recent discoveries. And when I say recent, I'm going back even 20, 25 years to like the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, which now is becoming fairly well known and not exactly common knowledge yet, but I think um, probably most of your listeners will be quite familiar with Göbekli Tepe. Maybe the general public isn't still. So we have these. It's pretty easy to say that we've been civilized for 12,000 years, um, whereas even only maybe in the last 5 or 10 years, that's become kind of acceptable to claim. Whereas before that, the academics would argue that, oh no, Sumer is the oldest civilization and it was only, 3,000 years ago, and like this kind of garbage where it's so narrow minded, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I just wrote that down because I write down what you was talking about. So uh, let me ask you what do you think? Because I have like three questions right here already, or three things right here
All
already
right.
written down. The first one is liquid mercury that was found at the pyramids. You was there at those pyramids, right?
I have not been to Egypt. I've been
No,
to
no, no,
this
no. I'm
the
talking about the
pyramids
ones
in
in
Mexico.
South America, the Quetzalcoatl one.
Yeah, I was at the. I've only been to one pyramid site in South America. Well, sorry, Central America in Mexico, and that is the one. It was Chichen Itza where I was.
Oh,
So
okay.
I would like to go to Tiwanaku and all those places in Peru and stuff like that as well. But I so far have not been able to do a lot of traveling. Um, and I'm pretty remote too. So for me to get anywhere is going to be an all day, at least an all day trip, just to get to somewhere accessible like Vancouver, any kind of international airport. I'm a good day away from any of those places. Um, but yeah, in terms of the liquid mercury, it's quite fascinating because nobody really has any explanation as to why any ancient civilization would would be um, would take it upon themselves to amass gigantic pools of liquid mercury in a buried chamber. So
Mm.
this has been found in a couple of sites in Mexico, and also in a pyramid in China.
Yeah.
And many people don't realize that there are pyramids in China. There's over 200 that have been documented. Um, the problem is the Chinese government is actively covering that up. So they don't want anybody to know that there are pyramids. They don't want anybody to visit them. They don't want any tourists coming in. And in fact, they even discourage the local population from going anywhere near them, to the extent that they have they funded a program where farmers can get money from the Chinese government to plant trees on top of these pyramids. Basically, pull an Amazon, right? So, like in the Amazon jungle, there are thousands of I'm not going to say thousands of pyramids, but there are thousands of sites, and many of them are interconnected, by what appear to be like straight paved highways that are potentially thousands of years old. Now, it's difficult to date these things, and we don't really have good dating systems for really hardly anything that has been discovered in the Amazon jungle. Um, but it's, you know, it's proposed that they are contemporary with the Maya and the Aztecs. So again, this brings us back to, well, when exactly were the Maya and the Aztecs? We don't really know. We know that the Inca civilization was still intact, although rather fragmented at the time of the Spanish when the Spanish explorers came over. Um, and sadly, they were wiped out, like, well, decimated, and in many cases by violence, but also by disease. So, uh, like the Inca told the Spanish explorers in many in no uncertain terms, we did not build these things. We don't know who did. They've been here forever. So that you can all we can really extrapolate is that they were from before the Inca civilization started. We don't really know when the Inca civilization started, so that doesn't help us too terribly much. And we don't really know who the people were who were in that area beforehand. Um, I mean, we do. There's a lot of information floating around, but I think my point is that a lot of the history of Mesoamerica is a lot. There's a lot of stuff in there that is true, but a lot of it is based on some parts of that story is speculative, and one of the biggest parts about it is the timeline. Um, and also, I think probably some of the religious aspects of those cultures are also um, I feel probably not well understood and probably are being misrepresented quite horribly.
Yeah, uh, you know, you mentioned the word civilization twice, a couple of times actually. I just wrote it down as twice right here. And I always ask everybody what is their criteria that is needed to be considered a civilization, because everybody has their own definition. Like you was talking about earlier about the
Yeah,
Sumerian being considered the first civilization. I know that academically they say that the Sumerians are considered the first civilization because of their writing system, but their writing system started as a pictographic script, just like we have pictographic scripts that are found in the French caves, right? Or the pictographic scripts that we find in China that predates, the Sumerian civilization. So if a pictographic
right.
script is considered a writing system, then academically I understand why they think that, because they say it's the most complex. But just like I said, it came to that point. The Sumerians was taken over by the Akkadians, and then the Akkadians were fighting with everybody behind that for the longest, and then it just eventually it became what it is today. But the point is that um, it was the writing system has always improved. Just like now, even today, our writing system is improved. Well, I'm not going to say it's improving. Some people say it's not improving because they took away cursive from schools around here. For some people, they say there's no
Right.
longer writing cursive, but um, it's just our writing will always improve. So I don't understand. Um, you know, every I understand everybody's definition. I just don't understand why we don't have one that's set as an actual criteria that everybody can agree with, from archaeologists to
Yeah,
paleontologists.
I don't think we can because you know, culture is very flexible and it fluctuates a lot. Even to take your point of pictographic script, I mean, today we have languages currently in the modern world that are modern systems that are essentially pictographic script. At least part of it is. So if you look at Mandarin and Cantonese, which so there's no such thing as a Chinese language. In China, they speak uh, thousands of different languages, but primarily there are two. Those are Mandarin and Cantonese, and they're quite similar in many ways. And one of the main similarities is that um, they are based on a pictographic system. So the original um, the original letters, let's say they're not letters, but they're little pictures. And originally there was several thousand different pictures of certain objects, different objects and actions, and then those over time, those came to become kind of mashed together or combined in certain ways to form more complex ideas, different representations of different things. But at the at the root of it, they're still recognizably the same pictures. If you were familiar with the original pictures, you would be able to recognize them still today. Um, so essentially, that is pictographic. On top of that, though, they also have added like a phonetic and different semantics and other things on top of that. So it's kind of this multi-layered. Uh, it's a very complex system. Um, so I think it's a mistake to say that pictographic is a more primitive form of communication. So that's one mistake that some academics might be making. Um, I also think that it's a mistake to necessarily say that you have to have a written language in to be considered a civilization. Or so let's look at another example. So let's replace the word civilization maybe with society. They really are the same thing, but they have a little bit of a different focus. So if you were to look at the North American indigenous population, which is composed of hundreds of different groups with different languages and different, uh, what's it called when it's like not necessarily a total language, but like a different dialect. So there's all these
Yeah.
different dialects within language groups, and they've evolved in ways that are very traceable and very parallel to the same type of um, kind of phenomenon or types of patterns that you see if you study, let's say, Germanic languages or being able to trace all the European languages back through the language groups of the Latin, the Romance, the Germanic, and the other the proto all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. Um, and so there's really no difference between the North American language, the evolution of North American languages, and the evolution of European languages. They've evolved in the same way. Um, did was there written language in North America 1,000 years ago? I don't know. Maybe there was, um, but even if there wasn't, it doesn't mean that they didn't have culture or a civilization in North America 1,000 years ago. There's there's very strong evidence culturally of other markers of civilization going back as old as well. Okay, so again, I don't want to stumble over dates, but I will give you one example. In my neck of the woods up here in Canada, there's a village that has been um, recently excavated. There was an archaeological dig there, and the uh, it's the high is it the Haislet Nation? I can't remember which, might be Tsimshian, but the people of the area have like basically have legends about uh, when their ancestors used to live in this on this one island, and um, essentially then said that that island was cut off. So in the old times of the legend, it wasn't an island; it was like a mountain or whatever. But later on in the story, it gets turned into an island because of the rising sea level. So lo and behold, our archaeology, some archaeologists went out there and did an excavation, and they found clear evidence of habitation and kind of basically normal, the same types of artifacts that you would have seen up to even just 200 years ago in the culture there. And this, some of the stuff was giving them dates back of like 14,000 years ago. So it's really a vindication of the legends that this is not a myth. This is a story. This is a history. So it's oral history being passed down through generations by the storytelling of the elders to the next generation. And this is we should not disregard that as a valid form of knowledge. And so just because it wasn't written down doesn't mean that it wasn't civilized.
Yeah, I liked how you ended it because hopefully I say this where it makes sense. So we'll find out when I'm done saying it. So I feel like writing kind of makes us lazy. And I say that because that gives you the opportunity to forget. Okay. Because once
Mhm.
you write something down, you no longer need to say, okay, I need to remember this. I know, you took what you written down, you put it in the corner somewhere, you know exactly where you placed it. If you need to go reference it for some odd reason, you can go there, take it out and look at it and say, oh, yeah, this is what it says. So you no longer have to remember it. And that gives us an
That's
opportunity to
right.
forget. So I look at it like that. And it's interesting to me because of the simple fact that I agree with you when you say that just because somebody didn't have a writing system doesn't mean that they couldn't have basically accomplished has been accomplished. Memorizing things is a great tool. You can see right now. I'm on Twitter and most of the social media sites, and most people, when I'm on Twitter, most people are grokking a lot of questions. And I can tell
Right.
you right now, Grok can only give you but so much of the information, right? And a lot of times it's not
Well,
accurate.
that's really ironic because I don't know if you know where the term grok originates from. It comes out of a Robert E. Heinlein novel called Stranger in a Strange Land, where Um, it's quite an interesting story in and of itself. Classic 60s science fiction. Sometimes that stuff doesn't age well. I personally would recommend this book just because um, it brings up and wrestles with a lot of kind of interesting topics that honestly we still need to re-examine, things like religion and the our ways of knowing and things like that. So in that book, um, what the main character is an alien, and he comes to Earth. And now, of course, in the 60s, they used the term Martian a lot, and the idea at the time was that aliens lived on Mars, and that was sort of the kind of the cool thing, and sort of the only planet that they knew about where people could have possibly come from. So, if you can overlook the fact that they're calling them Martians and just go with, let's just say he's an alien, without necessarily worrying where he came from. But the point being that the culture on his planet was very different from that on Earth. And on his home planet, they had a cultural concept that and the word for it is grok. And what to grok, so it's a verb, and to grok a thing is not is to have this deep understanding of that thing, but also not just an understanding, but a deep appreciation of it, almost like a almost a spiritual reverence in some regard. So I I I think it's well, I guess hilarious, but sad maybe, ironic that that grok has now devolved into a form of um, scraping um other people's brains without really needing to engage your own brain, and without having certainly a deep understanding and certainly a deep appreciation. So all of the things that were implied in the original term grok, and the reason why that was an important concept in the book at all was to point that out, that hey, these humans are really acting foolishly. Like not to say that we're stupid, but a lot of times we choose to be stupid, and so they've taken that same concept and just proven that Heinlein was right.
Yeah, people like to be ignorant, man. I don't understand it sometimes. It's very frustrating because I hear a lot. I actually when I first started this, you remember, I was always in the comment section, always sharing what I read.
Yeah,
I was always in there doing what I was doing, and that never slowed down. Even when writing my
yeah,
book, going out to the places, actually doing streaming now, videos, interviews, and so on and so on. My interaction with the people hasn't slowed down, and it's not like trying to say that I'm trying to be over anybody. It's because when people reach a certain level, they forget to talk to the people who've been following them for years, right, or been interacting with them for years. And I don't want anybody feel
right,
like I don't want to ever feel like I built my brand up because you have your own brand. You're a publisher, also. You mean you I mean you have a lot of people under your brand, including me, right? So it's you know I understand that everybody is trying to make a voice for themselves, but like when you gave me the opportunity to write my book, I just wanted to have something that to at least have out there in this world where I put a lot of work into, because my YouTube channel can get shut down at any moment and I can lose, all my videos. And would that bother me? No, because most of those videos I feel like right now are just basically like it got me to where I'm at now. Now I feel like after all this time, I finally figured out what I wanted to present to the world. And it was basically my journey. That's
right,
why I named it Journey Through the Origins of History, is because it's my journey. It's what I've learned on my way through reading it. I don't know what's facts over fiction. The only thing I can tell you is
yeah,
what I was able to verify from what somebody else said. You mentioned Eric von Daniken. So I actually started with his books first, and then it was Zachariah Sitchin after that. Well, Eric von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods, was basically a book about questions. He had a whole bunch of questions that he didn't really know how to answer. And because, religion
exactly,
couldn't give him an answer and science sometimes couldn't give him an answer, he felt like, okay, well, there's another option, extraterrestrial, right? Which is, which
yeah,
you basically you eliminate all the other possibilities. If science can't tell me what it is, if the government can't tell me what it is, if it's not explained in this way, then what about this? And because I am interested in this field, I want to see if it is this. And sometimes it makes me wonder, because religion, I always say when I have interviews, when I'm talking about religion, is what's the difference between God and an extraterrestrial, right? And what is
yeah,
the difference
yeah,
between God and an alien? God is an alien to us because he's not supposed to be us. Yes, we may look like him, what it says from the Bible or whatever, but he is not us. Makes him alien like. And since he's not
right,
from this planet, and how do we know that? Because he created this planet. That means he's from outside this Earth's atmosphere, right? He can't be even from the hollow Earth theory or Middle Earth theory because he created this planet. Hollow Earth and Middle Earth is part of this planet. Without this planet,
right,
that wouldn't be here. Um,
yeah.
but so we know
See,
that
now
he's
you're doing something unique here. You're taking logic and applying it to theology. There's not that many people doing that, you know? And a lot of people, um, there's kind of two sides to that, where some people will say, "Oh, you know, God doesn't exist because it's not logical," and then some people will say, "Oh, well, God exists, and therefore I don't need logic because I just believe what God told me." And I think both of those approaches are flawed. And so I think it's you've hit the nail on the head here, where you've got to look at what religion is able to teach us, but also apply logic to it and go, okay, well, does that make sense? And or what, given this, what else might possibly that mean? And I think that's sort of the idea that I was getting at with the UFOs and the Bible thing is like, well, here's the story that we're presented, but there's some weird stuff in here that doesn't quite fit the narrative that we're being told. So what's going on? And we don't know. We'll never really know. But you're right. That Von Daniken asked the question. There's a question mark on the front cover of Von Daniken's book.
Yeah,
It's not His book is not called Chariots of the Gods. It's called Chariots of the Gods with a question mark at the end.
yeah.
That's literally in the title. So he was asking questions. Now, maybe he had some. He might have been assuming what the answer was. Kind of feels like he probably was.
But we
But
all do that. We all
ultimately,
do that to an extent.
yeah, yeah, we all do.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say that. Yeah, I think we all do that to an extent. Because we want to give our point of view for the fact that
Absolutely.
there's more to the story.
Absolutely. So this brings us back nicely to Egyptology. So if there's any bunch of guys who loves to assume, it's the Egyptologists. So everything we know, no, I'm going to use air quotes, everything we know about Egypt, in terms of like the study of ancient Egypt, is essentially all comes from studies that were made by people approximately starting around 200 years ago. So it's all just within the last 200 years. Um, and really, mostly, probably more like 150 years ago. Um, People from Europe, primarily from like England, Germany, and maybe America to some extent, um, rich guys who could afford to do such a thing would travel over to Egypt. And what did they do? They took um, wrecking bars and um, pickaxes, and they started busting stuff up and trying to get inside of it. Why? Were they looking for answers? No, they were looking for treasure. They were looking for gold. And so this is the exact same stuff that the conquistadors did to South America, 500 years previously, where without really any kind of thought or concern for the culture or the any kind of importance that the original people might have had on these structures, they were here to destroy. They are here to rape and pillage. They're not here to understand. And so they also had to put a veneer of science on it, like they were studying the culture. Okay, so they did, and how they did that was just basically making shit up. So they would take, um, they would take pictures or etchings or whatever they had at the time of, various carvings and hieroglyphics and all that stuff. And before they had even done any kind of translation, there was already these explanations being put on them, primarily around like, oh, this is all religious symbolism, and these are gods, and this is how they think about death, and how they're preparing for the afterlife, and all this stuff. Some of which might be true, um, but most of that stuff was put on as an assumption without any knowledge of the actual language that was written. So at the same time, they like to talk about how written language is the most important thing that makes a culture, and then they ignore the written language when they find it, and they just tell you what it means. Okay, so
Yeah,
and
that is
this
funny
is the
how that
kind of
works.
thing that so it's like that's crazy. So now this has found its way into the Bible and into Christianity in a huge way. So I don't know if I've talked to you yet about my project that I'm working on now, but it's this massive project where I'm attacking the well, I shouldn't say attacking. I'm tackling this massive project of the ancient Hebrew texts. So what we typically know as the Old Testament, or if you are taking a slightly more accurate view and looking at the Jewish culture, then it's the Torah. So the Torah and the prophets and um, the histories that we find in the Old Testament. So what I'm doing is um, I've taken the entire uh, codex of the Hebrew uh, texts. I've put it all into a database, and so now I'm going through and I'm analyzing every single word and cross comparing it to every time where that word is used, and comparing the context of the word in you know within the context of the words around it, as well as looking at the etymology of how other words are related to each other with root words and extensions and things like that. And what I'm so this is a huge project, and of course I have a computer software engineering background, so I'm using a lot of my skill sets there to make things semi-automated. But even then, I'm doing I'm putting human eyes on every single word. So I'm not using AI, and I'm using data. I like to call it data enabled because having the ability to pull thousands of records out of a database is so fast and makes things a lot easier. But I'm still manually analyzing every single word. And what I'm finding is there are um, there's probably so I don't have a final count yet because I'm what I'm finding is that tons of words are actually the same word. So um, let's say you were reading some Dr. Seuss book. Let's say you're from the future. You come back and you find a Dr. Seuss book. It's the only English book that we've found. Um, So you've got the cat in the hat, and the cat in the hat appears on every page, and he's talking to the other kids. Now, it makes sense to us to say, whenever you see the word cat that's made out of the letters CAT, that means this, and has a certain meaning. It means a cat. That's not what you find in the texts of the Old Testament. Instead, you find every time you have a certain letter, a certain string of letters, um, according to the traditional translations, it doesn't always mean the same thing. Well, sorry guys, but when I see a word, especially if you're going to tell me that the written language is the basis of civilization, then I'm going to interpret a word in a consistent manner as much to the whatever degree possible. And sometimes it doesn't work totally. But what I'm finding is like about 9 times out of 10, if I take all the instances of the word and I do further analysis on it, and I try to find a meaning that fits in every case, I usually can. So there's certainly there's some outliers where something's not quite right yet, or I'm not there yet. So, uh, but it's fascinating to me that in thousands and thousands of cases, I would say maybe over half the words, um, it's literally that the translators, when the Hebrew texts were originally translated into Greek, this goes all the way back. You can trace the mistranslations all the way back to the Greek Septuagint. Um, when they did that, there was just like, okay, here's a word, cat. It means cat. Oh yeah, but over here, I would prefer if it meant something else. I would prefer if cat meant dog. Okay, well then let's just say that it does. And so this happens time and time and time again. And it's fascinating. And I'm probably going to spend the next 10 years, maybe even longer. I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but it's quite a fascinating project.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I got two things right here well, three things. First, I want to go back to the traditional oral story, which you was talking about. Traditional oral
Yeah.
story. That's all it means. When people say myth or mythology, it literally just means a traditional oral story. Now there is another definition because it has multiple definitions for mythology and so on, right? But uh,
So
traditional.
let me jump in on that for a second. So
Okay.
let's look at the traditional interpretation of the Bible that,
Okay.
um, like most Christians will say that God wrote the Bible. Okay, but they will also say that Moses wrote the Bible. Okay, so how do you rectify that? Well, that's because God told Moses what to write. Okay, that's fine. So when did Moses live? Well, nobody really knows exactly. And a lot of people will debate whether Moses was even a real person or not. But we do have some clues within the story because so, according to the story of Moses, he was in Egypt and he had to talk to the Pharaoh to get to let the people leave Egypt. So that means that this story takes place within a very specific geographical framework and a time frame. So the pharaonic period of Egypt um, only goes from so it starts in what they call the Old Kingdom, what a classical Egyptologist would call that, and that was uh, I don't know the exact date, but probably well let's look at the other end. We know when the Pharaonic period ended was the Ptolemaic period, which is starting to overlap into the beginnings of the Roman Empire. So, for example, Cleopatra was an Egyptian queen of some kind. Maybe not a pharaoh, but she was kind of the tail end of the Pharaonic period, and she was married to a Roman. What's that guy's name again? Mark Antony, a Roman centurion or something like that. So the timelines are pretty clear in terms of uh, when Egypt ends. So if Moses was real, he would have had to have lived sometime before the Roman Empire, but not too much before, maybe, or when did the whole Egyptian period? How long was it? It was a few thousand years. So let's say at the very longest, maybe the Egyptian civilization, as we think of it in terms of ancient Egypt, was maybe 3,000 years from beginning to end. Maybe let's be generous. Let's say 5,000 years. So we can safely say that if Moses existed, he would have existed between 5,000 BC and like 0 BC or 100 BC. So we have a pretty small window in terms of like the whole breadth of history, and we also have a lot of very specific locations. are mentioned in the text. There's Egypt, there's Israel, Syria, Lebanon, and a lot of these places have the same name. You can, if you read some of these place names in ancient Hebrew, are recognizable as the word that we still use for them. Lebanon is a really good example. It's literally the exact same word. It's almost a one-to-one direct transliteration, letter to letter. And then there's other places like let's see, I'm struggling to remember, but anyway, there's a few other places that are like in that same area. So between uh, Mesopotamia, sort of Anatolia, and down to Egypt is sort of the limits of where the storylines occur. Um, so we do have a time and a place. So I guess there's a couple ways to interpret this. So did God show up and tell Moses what to write at that time and place? Maybe. Or and I think maybe it's both. So it's not necessarily an or, maybe it's an and or, because parts of that story, so the parts about the Exodus and the things that happened after the Exodus, um, could be written by Moses. But then you have a whole bunch of stuff that happened after Moses died. So Moses didn't write that stuff unless dead men can write, which last time I checked, they can't. And so then if you go earlier to the stuff before Exodus, now we're into the book of Genesis, possibly the book of Job. Um, it's not clear whether Job is a very early or if it came later. Um, so I'm at this point in my study, I'm taking the not the assumption, but I'm including it as a possibility that Job may be written before Genesis or around the same time. So I'm looking at these very early writings and thinking about the stories that they're telling, and they seem to be happening a few thousand years earlier than Moses. Now, especially if you are a young Earth creationist view, then you have if Moses was, I'm going to use my dates because I've done some research. I figure Moses lived around 1350 BC. So I'm going to say that that was three. Let's round it up a little bit and say it was three and a half thousand years ago. So if you then look at the I don't personally believe this, but a lot of people will think that the Earth is only 6,000 years old based on the genealogies presented in the Bible. So if that was true, which I'm not saying it is, but if it was, then you have 2,000 years, two and a half thousand years between the creation of the world and Moses. So did that? How did those stories get written? Did God come to Moses and say, "Hey, let me tell you a story. Here's what happened 2,000 years ago"? Maybe. Or did Moses have previously written histories that he was able to read, and then got incorporated into the Torah? Or maybe Moses had nothing to do with it, and somebody else took Moses' story that he wrote and also took these older stories and combined them into a library, essentially a small library. Or there was oral tradition involved, where these had been stories that were passed down orally from generation to generation through the elders, which is entirely possible. And if it was 2,500 years, that's a long time to remember a story. But honestly, I think it goes way farther back. I think probably that these oral stories, in many cases, extend back over 10,000 years. Um, and if you look at archaeology that is coming to light uh, on kind of in sort of the fringes of archaeology, um, they're not necessarily well. Um, I was going to say they're not well accepted, but that's not even true. It's more that they're not really well publicized. So what we're starting to see is all over the globe we are getting um, dating on archaeological sites going back 50,000 years, where there is um, clear cultural evidence of humans doing civilized things, such as making instruments,
Tools,
making
simple
tools,
tools.
yeah, making tools, making art, making shelters, and so this brings us back to what is civilization. Well, what civilization is not is stuff that animals do, that humans could do. Humans do still do those things, but I think the differentiation is if there's a thing that humans do that animals don't do, that's a pretty good indication of civilization. But it's still not a like a totally clear because there are animals that make shelters, there are animals that make tools, and there are animals that have language. And these are not controversial claims. These are things that people who study animals know. Now, there's still a bit of a disconnect because the people who study animals maybe haven't convinced the anthropologists. Well, actually, I bet that most anthropologists are probably going to lean towards being favorable to that kind of an interpretation. But it's more of the I don't even know, but like there's certain people who still, for whatever reason, are fighting to hang on to these boundaries where it's like, no, this is the way we are defining it,
Yeah.
and we're not budging.
Yeah, that's funny because you're right. I bring up this because you mentioned civilization again. So Margaret Mead says civilization started somewhere. Well, they said that she said this in a lecture that she had at a university or something, or some kind of speech or something. And they said that she said that civilization started around 15,000 BC, 15,000 years ago. And it was because of an indicator of a femur bone being healed, meaning that somebody took time out of their day and out of their uh, time of survival to take care of somebody who couldn't do it, bring them food, water,
Yeah,
possibly bathe
that's a good
them, move
indicator.
them. Yeah. Um, and
But
she
we're
says,
finding
but
stuff like that. Go ahead, sir.
yeah, no, no, no. It's cool. It's cool. I was just going to say that, but that is a good indicator. But then, I read this some years ago. I don't know how long ago, but then I started seeing videos of other animals helping animals. So I seen a video of a monkey trying to help a dog get out of a well one time, throwing it up there until it,
Right.
finally collapsed on and got out. I've seen just the other day, matter of fact, I think it was just yesterday. I seen that there was I want to say it was like an armadillo trying to cross the pavement, the road, and somebody was recording
Yeah.
it from the car, and it was this bird. It looked like a crow, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was hitting it from behind to get it to cross, hurry up and cross the road, right? So, um, animals like that don't have the same language, or at least we don't think they have the same language. They're able to communicate their way to help each other out. So when I learned
Right.
about that Margaret meeting a couple of years ago, I was just like you. Yeah, that's a good indicator. But
But
now
okay, here's check this out. So
okay,
I like that because there's um that is a good indicator, and she made a very good point based on the evidence that she had at the time. Since
yeah,
then, we found so much more evidence. So
Yep.
recently, and I'm just going to look at my notes here. So in okay, I could follow up with this later. I don't have the full notes right here, but 40,000 years ago. So this is Margaret said 15,000. This is like three times farther back. Um, there is evidence of Cro-Magnon man, which is so back in around this time period, there were modern humans, there was Neanderthal, there was Denisovan, and there was Cro-Magnon man. So four different species of humans were living on Earth at the same time. These Cro-Magnon man, from this one site, um, dating back 40,000 years, there was a skull found at this site where um, these guys had performed brain surgery on a living human to try it, probably because maybe there was like some subdermal bleeding or something like that, and they knew there was a problem, and they knew that in order to try to fix that problem, they had to drill a hole in this guy's skull, and that's what they did. Not only that, but in there's actually um, a few pieces of evidence that are very similar to this, and I'm not sure if it's this exact case, but in some similar cases, they know that not only did they try the surgery, but it was actually successful because in some of these in some of the evidence that is similar to this, not only was there clear drill marks in the skull, but also there was a drill mark on the skull, and as well as some kind of scratching marks, like where they had used like scalpel type of device to cut the skin around. Um, After that, the person survived for at least a couple of months because we know that because there's evidence of not only the wound but of the bone beginning to heal itself after the fact. So it's pretty fascinating that 40,000 years ago we had brain surgeons. So if you're going to tell me that we didn't have civilization 40,000 years ago, look at the evidence, because to me brain surgery is is only possible in civilization. You don't see monkeys doing brain surgery.
You know what? I'm actually gonna look that up and just see, just in case, because you never know. You never know nowadays,
Maybe
right?
they do. Maybe they do.
But it's funny you brought up
Well,
the Cro-Magnon. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's funny that you brought up the Cro-Magnon because now the new word for them is actually called European early modern humans, which I just learned
Okay.
maybe like a year ago or something like that. And they say that they settled either in North Africa and Europe. And so it's just interesting that you said that some people don't believe we had a civilization 30, 40, 30, 35,000 years ago because they actually went extinct around somewhere around 40,000 years ago. And like you said, with surgery, uh, you had that you have to be civilized on some kind of level because you're taking the time out your day. Well, honestly, it goes back to what do people consider a civilization in the first place, right? Because everybody has their
Right.
different criteria. But at the end of the day, those people were helping and doing surgery back then. Now, one thing that I just learned
Right.
recently, and I don't know where I learned it at. I can't remember what book it is, but it was just a recent book. It was talking about obsidian and used for surgical tools versus what they're using now. And they say I believe that obsidian can cut much cleaner than the tools that they use today, and that there's argument that the medical teams should go back to it because it's so much easier. The skin can heal from it better. I believe it's obsidian, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. No. Yeah,
Um,
you're right. I remember reading that as well. It's remarkably sharp. Like
Yeah.
I see these guys doing like flint knapping, and even on material such as flint, you can get some seriously sharp edges. To the extent that I'm like, I'm kind of afraid to try it. I kind of want to try it still, but you got to be careful when you're doing that stuff. And the guys who do it have they're taking precautions, safety precautions, like they one of the techniques is you kind of do this hit the stone with another stone, and you kind of do it on your lap, but you have to have like a thick leather, like almost like chaps, to cover your leg. Otherwise, you're going to cut yourself. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. Eh? It's amazing.
Yeah,
So
I can't remember where
I'm just
I
looking at
read it
my
at, but oh, go ahead.
I'm just looking at my my notes. So I've got another book that I'm starting to work on here, about this topic, about how old stuff, like some of these really ancient dates that we're getting from archaeology in the last 10 years that's coming out. So, okay, so what about using boats? Um, is that a technology? Or is that a sign of civilization? Seems like it would be. How about heated water, hot water, and how about bedrooms? I mean, okay, maybe not bedrooms. Animals make bedrooms for themselves, um, but there's evidence here of Neanderthals using using fire and using hot stones, and then putting those hot stones essentially into a small pool of water to heat water for themselves. Why? What, like animals don't do that. So that's pretty interesting. And so that and this the whole thing about boats, 60,000 years ago. So, a minute ago we were talking about 40,000, but there's all this evidence that just keeps pushing it back. So 60,000. Okay. What about before that? Okay. Well, I'm going to keep going, and I've got a whole list of here. I don't know, probably, well, it's hundreds of records here in terms of amazing things that people have been doing for a really long time. Um, according to my research, the earliest evidence that we know of where humans, or I'm not even going to say human necessarily, because this is getting so old, we don't even know if we would call them human. But 350,000 years ago, we have evidence of somebody, some kind of hominid, who was purposefully building fires, uh, probably for cooking, but we don't necessarily know why. But we definitely see the evidence of that happening, and we can date that based on the materials left over. Um, Even older, 400,000 years ago, apparently there's a spear found. This was found in England. Um, so the more we look, the earlier these dates go. So that's probably going to be the next book that I publish. We'll be exploring that, and just really, I was kind of inspired by Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, where he talks about some of this stuff. And this was probably 20, maybe more than 20 years ago. He published that, and so the evidence that has come to light since Michael Cremo's book was published is just like astounding. There's just so much more, and a lot of the things that Cremo would talk about were essentially just being labeled as out of place artifacts, and by giving them a fun sounding name, it was easier to kind of write them off. Well, it's like it can't be right. What you're saying is impossible. So a lot of that stuff got discredited just because it's impossible. Well, maybe, but also, how is it here? So to me, there's a lot of unresolved questions around some of that stuff, and I don't necessarily believe, um, like some of that stuff. I I do have to take with a grain of salt some of these claims, um, but also if you have actual archaeologists publishing actual papers and saying this is the this is the date that we got using the established scientific methods and using best practices of archaeology, then how can you ignore that stuff? And so there's just a lot of that really coming to light.
Yeah, because it's just so amazing to me that everybody could possibly have their own translations and their own theories. You can have two people who go to the same exact school, take the same exact class with the same exact teacher, and possibly even at the same time, right? And still come up with two different theories, right? And they both can have the same credentials and everything. You have to do your due diligence to figure out who is, accurate or not. And that's what brings me back to the point of like with your books, like you put a lot of great information in your books, and you don't try to overwhelm people with nonsense. I've read a lot of books where I feel like a lot of it is just what I call personally, quote unquote, fluff, right? Just trying to make the book look thicker because they're trying to sell the fact that there's a lot of information in there, when in reality, uh, most of the information you're going to get is going to come from information that's not complete in the first place. So somebody has to put in their own fluff in there to make the information sound a certain way. Um, a good
Yeah,
example is that the cuneiform tablets. When people look at the cuneiform tablets, we know that they found them in, personal places. We know that they found them at schools, right? That's how we know they had certain schools, right, for teaching people how to write cuneiform. And everybody had their own style, right? Like how I write and how you write are two different ways, right? And
right.
in reality, if a lot of authors will use an editor to edit their book, so now you're not, it's not in your words any longer, it's in the in the editor's words, right? They're saying it for you in a better way for some people to understand, but
Yeah,
some people might not be able to understand it that well. You might have to keep it simple and stupid for some people, right? Because that's how I learned, keeping it simple and stupid. And
yeah,
um, and that's why through my book, Journey Through the Origins of History, I try to just talk about the basics of what I knew, right? And then I just wrote more about it. Of course, I put articles on there from my website because those articles are what sparked my interest, right? Digging in more into it.
yeah,
You said earlier, a lot of words mean the same thing, and that's very true. Like I've one of the words that I could tell you that drives me crazy is and I talk about this a lot, is the word manna, right? We know in the Bible it says that God provided manna for the people when they were traveling them 40 years and stuff like that, right? But when you look at the
yeah.
Greek Septuagint and you type in manna in the Strong's Concordance, you get what is called, what is named a man. It's a man, it's a human, because it
Okay.
says
Yeah,
man, right? So now it
yeah,
makes me think, that was God providing man cannibalism to the people for those 40 years, right? Because if mana means man in the Strong's Concordance, what am I supposed to believe? Because it's coming from the Greek translation, right?
right.
And
So you should make a list for me of all the stuff you want me to check out in Hebrew because I've got the tools now.
yeah,
Um,
you
but
do you know
yeah,
who Jeff Benner is?
yes, I know the name. I can't remember if I've read his stuff at all.
Yeah, I did a podcast with him in my early days about the Elohim.
Okay,
And he sent me like
okay,
15 of his books for free. He just sent me 15. I study
wow,
those books hardcore. Like he does the translations, he does the
uh,
what the actual words mean, what's the actual sentence broken down. Like, and of course, in his translations, he actually has a school, and he teaches people ancient Hebrew. I can't remember the website's called, but it's like if you just type in Jeff A. Benner, uh, you'll be able to find him, a Hebrew scholar. Um, amazing individual. And what's so interesting about him is I actually, when I had him on my podcast, I asked him specifically, could the Anunnaki be who the Elohim is? And to get your answer, you're gonna have to watch that episode.
Yeah, that's fair because I honestly I don't know. I can totally make it. I could see it going either way on that. Yeah. Hey, I need to wrap this up, Tyrone. But you know
Yeah.
what? I think we should do this again, maybe in a month or two, and then certainly I would love to chat with you more about the more of the Hebrew stuff, particularly as I'm really going to be digging into that stuff. Yeah, like I said, it's probably going to take me 10 years to finish that project. But in the meantime, I do have another book that will probably be coming out this year, and that'll be about the ancient archaeological stuff.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So plug yourself in real quick. Just tell everybody where they can find you at, what you do, and
You
we'll
bet.
close it up and wrap it up.
Sounds good. So yeah, my name's Ken. My latest book is Pyramid Tech. Well, you can't see it. There it is, Pyramid
I
Tech.
got you. I
And
got you. Just name them out.
okay, cool. There it is. So there's Pyramid Tech. I got UFOs in the Bible. I've got the Atrahasis epic, the Enuma Elish commentary. I've got Before Roswell, which is a study about like 100,000 years worth of UFO encounters. And I've got Fermi's Paradox's Bullshit, which explores the question of whether there is life out there. So yeah, you can find me on Amazon or on check out my website dimensionful.com.
Yep. All right. I appreciate it, man. Hey, we got about 50 people watching. They usually start watching this early in the morning time, so it's probably gonna jump up to 200. I promote your work a lot. I enjoy your work. You gave me the opportunity to publish my book, so I appreciate that. I appreciate you talking to me. And yeah, well, we could definitely set that up with the ancient Hebrew stuff because I'm actually teaching myself that language now, along with the cuneiform script. So we could definitely do that. I
Nice.
appreciate it, Ken.
Okay. Thanks, Tyrone. Always a
All
pleasure.
right, man. All right, take it easy.